Do what? Welcome, 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 welcome. Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Sal Cosentino, uh, and I am your. Oh, sorry about that. Check, 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 checking. Good afternoon, and it's me, Sal, again, your cloud architect and trainer, Sal Cosentino. Um, in today's session, we're going to be talking about DDoS and CDN. We're going to touch base a little bit on what CDN is and what DDoS is. And before we start, I want to make sure that you guys are aware of what a DDoS is and DOS versus DOS. So these are some important topics that I want to touch base on, like today's topics, which are very very important. Uh, it's a little bit bigger for you guys, so you guys can see this live. And again, we are today's topics. Okay. And again, you have to understand the difference between DDoS and DOS. DOS. Let me make some room. And DDoS. So you have your denial of service, and you also again they're both. You have your distributed denial of service. So DDoS. And these are some things we're going to be talking about. Again, I apologize. I'm just going to make this explain. And this is sort of my agenda. Explain what DOS is, what DDoS is, and DOS is right. And we'll talk about best practice. We'll talk about CDN and some common architectures, right, that can be used in your environments, right? We're talking about lab environments, right? Lab. Remember, to each its own, to each it's different. Again, every network is different. Everybody has a different network. It's not something you want to use in your real environment. So again, that's why I mentioned when we do talk about this stuff, this is more of a common architecture that we can be used. And these are some questions that might arise, when you're talking about your, in your resumes and stuff, and not your resumes, but when you're talking to a recruiter, and a recruiter asks you, "Hey, what's a DDoS? What's a DOS?" Again, like I said, these are things that you know will come up, right? So, um, making sure that you're aware of what those mean, right? So understand that, and then some common architectures we're going to be talking about. There's also some stuff about, like, the various components of for cloud and security architecture, right? We're talking about cloud and security architecture, right? So these are some of the topics again. So these are some of the main focuses and main points of common architecture. And again, this is to help with uh, help and protect against a typical DDoS um, protection. And again, there is when we talk about DDoS protection, it's a service as well. And again, when you're creating these, and I'll show you kind of briefly. If I have enough time, I'm not gonna make this um too lectury. I want to make this as hands-on, but again, like for engineers, you were more the hands-on, and we can show you the demos and whatnot, and get you prepared for that. But when we're going through these series, the more likes and the more comments I get, the more I create. If you do like this and you do want to see more, like and subscribe to this video and tell me that you're interested in learning a little bit more. And again, I can, create one-to-one videos for that specific lab of interest, right? So we talk about the protection against the typical DDoS protection. Um, and this is from an attack, uh, an attacker, which is an attacker. The attack is an attacker that is on a server or client device, right? Or device, whatever device it is, right? Server and device. And again, this device can be bigger or smaller than what we're using, right? So remember that. That's important. So the device the attacker uses could be bigger than what the devices that we have. And I'll get to that point as well too when we talk about DDoS. There's the different DDoS, and I also want to touch base on uh, the DDoS protection plans, right? Um, in Azure, and I think it's basic versus advanced, basic versus advanced, and we will touch upon some of those features if we have enough time, right? And in this quick video, and again, we'll see what we can come up with, and we'll see what we can do when we talk about that specific stuff, right? So what I want to know is, again, a lot of people ask, like, okay, what's a DDoS, right? So first thing we're going to talk about, and I'm going to get a different colored pen for us here, so that and we'll see that this pen is blue, right? So DDoS stands for distributed denial of service service attack. Well, what does that mean? Um, Basically, it's a more sophisticated version of DOS, right? For example, it uh, uses actually, you know what? Let's talk about let's explain what DOS is, right? Let's explain what DOS first, because you might need to understand what DOS first is, right? So let's say, what is DOS? And this is important too, because when we're talking about DOS, we talk about attacks um, that use uh, a source or single source um, for its own running, um, that can overload a target machine with traffic, could be incoming traffic, right? Which will make it unavailable, right? So that's in my own words again, So again, this is simple, very, very unique in its own way. And again, the DOS is denial of service. Obviously, we know that DOS is denial of service, right? So that's what that means, and that's important to know, right? Especially when you're going in and you're answering questions, like these specific questions that you're going. And again, DNS uses attacks. These are specific attacks. So these are specific attacks that use a single source for its own running that can overload a target machine with traffic. Again, it could be any type of traffic, which will make it unavailable, right? So, say for example, DOS attacks Usually it overload. When I talk about overload, it could also mean flooding as well too, right? So flooding, which is important word that you can use, uh, especially with which will make the service or the server unavailable, or website, right? So with traffic, which will make it, sorry, the when we talk about it, we're talking about the website, right? Say, or resource, right? Either or, right? Unavailable, right? There is again, and these are specific topics. I mean, these are specific, like, let's say, words or abbreviations that we hear a lot in the security world. And when we talk about, DDoS, we talk about, again, different volumes, right? um like what volume, what the volume of traffic, like, for example, on a DDoS, right? So let's say, for example, a DOS, right? As an example, let me pull up my drawing board here just to kind of give you guys a better understanding. So let's say we have our attacker here, right? And then we have our denial of service, right? We have our denial of service, right? And then these are our web applications, right? We could say these are our web applications, right? And again, this could be in a like a fleet, right? We could say like a fleet or a group of. So this could be a group of web servers, for example, right? And this could be our service, or which could be our denial of service, or DOS. Put that in right here, DOS, right? And these are our fleets or web servers, fleets or web servers, right? Or a group, web server group, right? So this fleet or web server group um, distributes or transmits less amounts of traffic, right? So if we're looking at our drawing board, and again, this could be an attacker within a system, within a server, right? This attacker could have anything. It could have a huge machine. It could have a lot of resources. It can have it can handle more requests than what we can, right? So remember that this attacker can have uh, a system or a server or system, right? That can handle, or by overwhelm, well, let's say overwhelmed, like in a DDoS, when we talk about requests per second. So we talk about requests per second, right? So that web application would be overwhelmed, let's say, for example, by 10,000 requests coming in from the attacker, where the attacker itself has like triple or quadruple the amount of attacking, right? So um, when we talk about the DDoS and our fleets, we also, on the opposite end of our fleet and our servers, we talk about our DDoS, right? So our denial of service, and I'll talk about that later in topic, because I want you guys to understand what DOS is first, and the differences, and how it's the differences in between the five differences, and what those differences are. And I'm going to touch base on one of them at a time. So five differences that I um, think are important for you guys to understand. So our first difference, right? We talk about traffic, or volume of traffic. Sorry, how much volume, or volume of traffic. Let me make this a little bit smaller and make this a little bit bigger. So we look at the volume of traffic, right, between the two, and again, let's see if I could split this in half for you guys. I don't want to make this too confusing. Right? So let's put a line straight down. We're just gonna move this. I will make this a little bit bigger for us visually so we can see this a little bit bigger. And there you go. Let's make this a little bit centered here, right? So when we talk about, again, we have the DOS side, right? Our denial of service versus our distributed denial of service. And I'll get to that part again because I think we talk about one option versus the other option and how much of a difference there is, right? So for example, when we talk about the differences and getting back to the differences, we have five differences, right? And one of them is volume of traffic. Second one is execution, right? Uh, and then we have our source, right? Or trace for that source, right? So that's three. Then four, uh, when we look at the differences between DDoS and DOS, right? So DOS detects, shows ease of detection, let's say, right? And five, um, you know, how fast, what's the speed of this attack? Like how fast is the attack, right? We could say speed, huh? What's its speed factor, right? So um compared compared to you know, your distributed denial of service, right? So these are the specific volumes. When we talk about volumes, like how does it transmit less amounts of traffic? Like, okay, so how does it transmit less amounts of traffic? So if we look at our picture here, right, we have our attacker within a server or a system, and he is using his own proprietary server to compromise and infect multiple computers on the internet, right? And again, from those infection of these specific groups or server groups or computers, um, and get them to work in sort of like that this fleet method, and then in order to get them to work in this fleet method, they need to launch an attack on that specific web application, right? So where's our web application? So if we're looking at our picture here, well, let's say our web application is here, right? For a distributed DOS. Um, as an example for volume of traffic, right? But in our denial of service, when we talk about volume of traffic, it transmits less amounts of traffic. Whereas in the DDoS, it transmits higher amount of traffic, right? So again, traffic could be requests coming from the attacker system, from from the web application server, right? Or from the attacker itself, uh, or from that fleet. And then those incoming requests from the attack or the attacker system from that web application server only handles, let's say, for example, 5,000 requests, where the attacker can launch 10,000 requests per second, right? So understand what that means, right? So our denial of service, let's say if the attack was coming from just an attacker, right? And their one system, an attacker had a big, powerful computer, which was bigger than a web application. So that's where we could see a denial of service attack, right? So it uses one single source, right? So that one computer, one system an attacker that had a bigger, powerful computer, and that's in my example here, which was bigger than the web application, right? So, um, the amount of requests coming in would is where the denial of service attack or the distributed denial of service attack would come in, right? So, say for example, again, in that denial of service. So say, for example, we're talking about a DDoS, right? We talk about, we did talk about it already. And again, when we talk about a server, we talk about a web application. So you're going to hear that a lot, right? So I'm going to say our server is a web application, right? And web application server, right? So that's going to be our server. I hope this makes sense so far. Again, please give me a like or subscribe. If you don't understand, if you'll kind of get the picture when you see it visually here. Again, you have to note the five differences between the two of denial of service and DDoS. There are its differences and stuff and whatnot. So in a denial of service here, we when we look at the differences between the two, again, we're looking at one system, and the attacker had a big, powerful computer, which was the attacker of the system here. Let's see if I can get my arrow. Um, so this attacker here, right, threw an attack out and launches 10,000, let's say 5,000 requests to the DOS, the denial of service. So that volume of traffic was higher from the attacker side than what the DOS or the web server, the fleet of web, or the web server group or fleets of web applications or infected machines that would handle. So if the attacker in question launches 10,000 requests, right, per second, and that web application would be way, or they say overwhelmed, and that's the word I want to use here because that's important, overwhelmed, right? Um, which overwhelms the system and its capacity, right? So overwhelms the system and its capacity. So that's what DDoS is, right? Um, Again, DOS is just uses a single source, right? So it uses a single source. To overload um, target machine um, with traffic. It doesn't matter how much traffic there is, right? And that traffic, and then from that, it makes it unavailable and making, therefore making it unavailable. Therefore making it unavailable, right? So this is very, very, very important, right? Um, we have to understand what that means. Okay. So just remember the difference between the denial of service, right? So our denial of service, right, versus our distributed denial of service. Um, right. So those two are different. And again, right, a server runs a web application and that service capacity can only handle 5,000 requests. So in this server, we could say this handles 5,000 requests, right? And requests per second, whereas our attacker's machine is bigger, right? And this is where that happens, can handle, let's say, 8 to 10,000 requests, right? 8,000 requests per second, right? So it's important to note that the differences, right? So when we talk about, again, the five differences, we talk about the volume of traffic, and when we talk about the volume of traffic is transmission, right? Transmits less amount of traffic, whereas um, our difference here in DDoS transmits much higher amounts of traffic, right, to that fleet of systems, right? So you'll see that those fleet of systems, from uh, you'll see the attack like in a DDoS environment. You'll see the attacker through a control server. right? It'll go through the control server, and then that'll basically um, go through these systems, or the system or systems that are infected, which would then, again, we talk about a fleet, and then that'll overwhelm all those systems and its capacity once it gets to the actual web application itself, right? So understand how that works, right? Um, so let's say these machines are important or can be infected, right? And when we talk about the different systems, we talk about web servers, obviously, or applications or web applications, right? So they're either web servers or web applications that hold applications, right? Um, you know, you can say this could be your active, right? Active, right? I could call this active if I want, right? To make it easier, active. Um, and then you have your slaves, right? Your slaves, and then you can have your victim machines. You can have your slave machines or your victim machines. Slave, and then your victim. We could call it, for example, as an example, right? And your slaves are basically your fleet or your web server group that hold that application, right? So you'll see a lot of traffic going through. Remember, your attacker within the server system will have, in a DDoS environment, obviously, um, it will have um, it'll have and handle more requests, right? So understand that, because that's important when we talk about denial of service versus distributed denial of services, right? When we talk about execution, right? In an environment for DOS, or denial of service, we talk about you know it's often carried out from a single machine, right? Like I told you before, it's one single machine. Um, one single machine, right? So that one system, an attacker had a big, powerful computer, which was bigger than the web application, right? So that's what execution is, right? So purple again. Whereas in a DDoS, we could say, it it tries to coordinate numerous hosts that have been infected with malware, right? And when we talked about malware, we could talk about bots too, right? Like different bots or different bots or different requests that come in, right? So understand that part. Bots. Um, and again, and because of that, it can create bigger problems, right? And create bigger issues, right? Then when we talk about DOS and you know, we talk about the source and the trace, right? The trace, how can we trace the source, right? So we can track in a DOS, we can track um its origin, or say tracking the origin. We could say tracking the origin is not as difficult, right? And that's important too when we're talking about source trace, right? And in a DOS attack, in a DOS, when we talk about the source trace, is when we start tracking the true origin, right? The true origin. It's not less, but it's more difficult. Right? So that's important too. Then when we talk about differences as well too, we talk about the uh, ease of detection, right? So is it simple to identify? Is it simple, right? And when we and again, is it simple for let's say for identifying and terminating a connection or the connection, right? Terminating a connection, right? And then again, that's important too, um, right? And in a DDoS attack, the DDoS attack, the DDoS attack, um, comes from, let's say, several locations, right? And hides its origins, right? So that's what that is. And again, it's simple, ease of detection, simple, identifying and terminating a connection, whereas the DDoS attack comes from several locations and hides its origin, right? So um, when we talk about ease of detection, right, then we also talk about how fast the attack is, the speed of the attack. Again, the speed of the attack. Oops. Let me get my eraser here. And again, you guys know what I mean. Typing a little too fast here. It happens to the best of us, right? So we talk about speed, right? And then the speed and within the speed, what do we talk about? We talk about um in a DOS, it's less quicker. Though it can be deployed less. The attack, the attack can be deployed less quicker, right? Whereas in our DDoS, we the attack can be uh, deployed much quicker, right? So understand the differences between the two. And again, this is very, very important when we talk about the rest of the stuff, right? So understand that and how that works, um, right? It is important when we talk about this stuff um, for us to understand and coordinate and go through and understand, especially when we're dealing with this stuff and we're trying to architect in our cloud environments or security environments, right? So it's important for all of us to know. Um, so that's that. I'm gonna take this here and I'm gonna give this to you guys um, as a good read, right? And again, this is for DX, since I talked about both. Let's talk about both. And again, when we talk about DDoS, we talked about distributed denial, service of attack, and what that is again is it's an attack. It's an attack that uses, um, let's say, multiple machines or a fleet of machines, a fleet of machines or computers or servers to flood a targeted resource, right? Um, yeah, so understand the differences again, very important again in our DDoS attack. It's just an attack where a person or an organization tries to take that other system down um, by using or overwhelming the system and its capacity. So that's very, very important. Um, We could say flood a targeted resource by overwhelming the system capacity, right? So understand the two differences because it's very important. I'm also going to stop. I'm going to actually stop here. In my next video, I'm going to be talking about our CDN and some common architectures. So this is coming up next. Right? So we'll talk about this next class. In our next lab session, we will discuss the following, right? Um, so we'll talk about our CDN and some common architectures. We'll talk about the different plans, uh, the cloud and security architect that will help us and protect against the typical DDoS protection from the attack. And then again, an attack is an attacker that's on a service, a server, or device, or right, or computer or server. Let's see, the device can be a server or computer. So the device can be a computer or server. Okay, sorry about that. So basically, so we have the two different types of architectures and common architectures when we talk about protecting our environments, our cloud environments, from our DDoS attacks. So we'll talk about how cloud and security architects can help protect against these typical DDoS protection from the protection from an attack, and then the attack is just an attacker that's on the device. And these are some common terms that you should be able to understand, um, right? And the device can be a computer or machine or server, right? Like I spoke about before, and DDoS protection plans in Azure. I'm just going to talk about Azure right now. Again, AWS uses AWS Shield. And there's also Cloudflare. They also have that. And I'll show you how to use that too. We'll talk about Cloudflare, which is kind of cool. I'll show you guys how to sign up, how to sign up for a free tier, right? Um, uh, right, and show you how to do that. And that's it for now. I'm going to end the topic here. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to ask in the section below or in the premiere of this video. And look forward to hearing from you guys soon. Have a good day. I'll talk to you guys later.